All right, Mark, what time do you have? Am I jumping the gun?
I think we can go ahead and get started.
All right, well, welcome to our afternoon session for demystifying dyslexia. This is a topic that both Mark Rincon and myself are very passionate about. We are so excited that you decided to spend some time with us this afternoon. We hope that you will learn some valuable information, gain some insights. Please know that we can't go over this is going to be like an overview because there is so much information in this area. Just for a little bit of housekeeping in the chat, I'm going to add the attendance link. I will add it a couple of times throughout the presentation. Just make sure that you're filling that out so you have your records. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Mark Rincon, for the next slide.
Thank you, Mandy. Like Mandy mentioned, we are really passionate and about this topic. And like she shared, there is a lot of information when it comes to dyslexia. And so we are hoping to give you a brief glimpse into dyslexia this afternoon. And so Mandy and I work at the Nevada Department of Education. We are from the Office of Teaching and Learning. Mandy is an education programs professional for Read by Grade 3, and I am an education programs professional for K-12 English Language Arts.
So we have some session outcomes for today, and really there's two that we want to focus on. And the first is become familiar with a broad overview of dyslexia. So again, this is going to just be like broad strokes. We can maybe try to do some follow-ups or some additional trainings in the future that would go a little bit more in depth. But we also want to explore instructional implications that impact students showing characteristics of dyslexia. So once we're familiarized with dyslexia, now what? How does that impact them instructionally? And what can we do at our school sites or within the realm of our responsibilities with students to help and provide supports?
So let's go ahead and dive in and understand what is dyslexia. And so in the state of Nevada, it is actually identified by state law. That state law is NRS 388.417. And it states that dyslexia means a neurological learning disability characterized by difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition and poor spelling and decoding abilities that typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language.
We also know that dyslexia is a spectrum disorder. So that means that dyslexia can present very differently from student to student, much like autism can vary from person to person. That dyslexia is a spectrum condition where symptoms range from almost unnoticeable to very challenging. Several reasons contribute to dyslexia going unnoticed in some cases or characteristics. Schools may mistake dyslexia for other challenges such as ADHD. High intelligence in a student can sometimes mask dyslexic difficulties, and students may develop compensatory strategies to succeed in reading and writing. So think about this. You might notice this when you're asking a student to read or to perform certain tasks, that there might be an uptick in behaviors. Such as avoidance, distraction, so the student doesn't have to read or perform the task at hand. Many years ago, I had a student, and this is a very extreme example, but this student would throw chairs when it was time because that was a way to avoid the task at hand, right? To mask that the true issue was that there was a struggle there with reading. Students can also be highly gifted linguistically with vocabulary, or can understand or comprehend at a very high text level when it is read to them. So when you read a story aloud, they're able to answer, they're able to respond to comprehension questions, but they can't decode simple words. This can lead to sometimes the wrong conclusion that the student maybe isn't trying, or it's an attitude issue, or the student knows more than what he or she is showing. But in reality, it's really the student has characteristics, or maybe does have dyslexia. And then we also know that coping mechanisms are common practices that we all do when we're not sure. So, for example, students can hide when you are choral reading. If you're only doing choral reading as a class, they're very good at kind of masking that within the choral reading. Or if they're working with a partner, allowing the partner to do most of the work, where they're going to just sort of sit back, copying, tracing, waiting for others to answer the questions, or asking others even for the answers. So those are ways that students may, or reasons why students that have characteristics of dyslexia may go unnoticed. And if you go to the next slide, so the following are characteristics for dyslexia. So difficulty reading words in isolation, difficulty accurately decoding unfamiliar words, difficulty with oral reading, either slow, inaccurate, or labored without prosody, difficulty with spelling. And it is also important to note that individuals demonstrate differences in degree of impairment and may not exhibit all the characteristics as listed above. So they may have issues with one or more or all of these characteristics.
So I'm now going to talk about neurology in the brain. And so dyslexia is a neurodevelopmental disorder that involves differences in brain structure and function affecting the acquisition of reading and language skills. And so this really, to understand this a little more, is that individuals with dyslexia, researchers have found that they have conducted different brain scans of individuals and have seen differences. In addition to that, they have found that there are genetic and hereditary factors at play when it comes to dyslexia. And when we think about our brain development for young children, that plasticity and intervention plays a really key component for individuals with dyslexia. And so looking at that brain differences, dyslexia is rooted in differences in brain structure. And so, like I mentioned, there's researchers that have examined different brain scans and have identified images that look different from individuals that have been identified with dyslexia to individuals that have not been, that do not show characteristics of dyslexia. In addition, these differences, like I mentioned, really influence reading and language acquisition. And so diving more deeply into this is that genetic and hereditary factors that some researchers have found that play a key component when understanding dyslexia. And so some researchers have shared that hereditary factors can increase risk for showing signs of dyslexia. And then as we start to develop more and learn more about dyslexia, understanding genetics really helps us identify and support individuals that are showing characteristics with dyslexia. And like Mandy and I mentioned at the beginning, there is a lot of research that is out there, and we are not going to dive into everything, but I hope some of this will maybe prompt some of you to think about, start looking into some of these categories or information that we're sharing. And then when it comes to that plasticity and intervention, you know, early detection and intervention are critical. Research has shown that. And that's what is really, we'll talk about dyslexia screeners and how we can screen for dyslexia at an early age and see if there's characteristics that are being displayed in an individual. And with specialized support, can really help individuals with dyslexia thrive throughout their lives. And so some of the following, as you can see on the slide, is primary reading, spelling characteristics of dyslexia. And so what that looks like is individuals have difficulty reading words in isolation. They have difficulty accurately decoding unfamiliar words. They also have difficulty with oral reading, slow, inaccurate, or labored without prosody. And it's also been noticed that individuals with dyslexia have difficulty spelling words. So let's go ahead and look at our next slide. And so that is, we're going to look at how do students with dyslexia function differently. And so about the fact right now is that children do not outgrow dyslexia, and about over 70% identified as dyslexic in third grade remain dyslexic as adults. And so dyslexia is a lifelong chronic disorder that individuals need to have interventions and learn to have the ability to adapt and have skill sets that they can start to be successful when it comes to reading and language. Without adequate intervention, dyslexia, like I said, is a lifelong disorder that's going to make an impact on individuals. And without adequate intervention, dyslexia continues to affect individuals throughout their lives. And so this can impact education, careers, and their daily day-to-day lives. And understanding these lasting impacts is really crucial for effective supports. Even as educators, parents, the general public, it's important to understand what these lasting impacts have and how they will be impacting individuals identified with dyslexia. And so research shows that IQ is weakly related to intervention outcomes. So the emphasis is really the importance of tailored interventions to help individuals. Like I mentioned, dyslexia really involves significant reading difficulties. And with time and intervention, individuals can be successful. So how does this difference affect their ability to read? And so let's dive into this a little more deeper. So a key components of dyslexia include phonological processing, decoding, word recognition, and reading fluency. When we look at phonological processing is that ability to recognize and manipulate the sounds of a spoken language. When we're examining dyslexic individuals, they often struggle with this fundamental skill. And it's difficulty in distinguishing and working with speech sounds is one of the hallmarks when it comes to an individual with dyslexia. And so how do we unlock, or looking at unlocking the code of language, is that dyslexic individuals may find decoding unfamiliar words challenging. They struggle with phonetic rules and patterns of language. Word recognition, especially for irregular words, can be a real significant hurdle for them. When it comes to reading fluency, dyslexia can impact reading fluency. Individuals with dyslexia often read slowly and with hesitations. And then also fluency, as we know, is a strong essential component for comprehension and also efficient reading. So when we are thinking about our challenges and strategies that we just mentioned, it's really important to look at implementing evidence-based strategies and interventions to support individuals identified with dyslexia. And so again, that comes back to that early intervention and specialized instruction are really critical. So let's look at some last two key areas, spelling and writing and comprehension. And so with spelling and writing, individuals struggle with word and expression. So what that means is that individuals with dyslexia often face difficulties in spelling words correctly. Organizing thoughts and ideas into coherent writing can be a real difficult challenge. Dyslexia impacts beyond just reading, but also the mechanics of written expression, punctuation, sentence structure. And so when we think about supporting dyslexic individuals for writing, you might want to look at, there's some really great resources out there, exploring strategies like spell checkers, speech-to-text software, assistive technology, which is now being incorporated into many of our word processing softwares, Microsoft Word, Google Docs, and really also emphasize the importance of breaking writing tasks into manageable steps for individuals identified with dyslexia. And it's also encouraging that creativity and expression while providing structured support. So lastly, with comprehension, so like I said, dyslexia can really affect reading comprehension. Individuals struggle to grasp the deeper meaning of written materials. And as we know, comprehension is vital for learning and critical thinking. And so when we think about this, how do we help individuals understand comprehension when they have dyslexia is promote active reading strategies such as highlighting, summarizing, discussing the text, provide opportunities for discussion and questions to clarify understanding. And so these are just some of the differences of how it affects their ability to read.
You might be familiar with the simple view of reading, where the simple view of reading basically says that word recognition multiplied by language comprehension equals reading comprehension. And it's a multiplication problem because if you are missing one of those components, if you are lacking in your word recognition, that's going to impair your reading comprehension. If you're lacking in language comprehension, that will also impact your reading comprehension. So students that have dyslexia or even characteristics of dyslexia oftentimes are really going to struggle primarily in the word recognition. They also can sometimes struggle with language comprehension as well. And so we have to bear that in mind. Remember, no two students will present in the same way because of that spectrum, it being a spectrum. So some students may struggle with both areas, some primarily with one versus the other. So this is just a little example, again, to piggyback off of what Mark was saying about reading comprehension and how students that might have dyslexia will struggle with their reading comprehension.
So now we're going to give you an opportunity to go into breakout rooms, and we would like to have you introduce yourselves and share what is your experience with dyslexia. Have you worked with an individual identified with dyslexia? Have you taken any assessment screeners? Done any training with dyslexia? Or do you have a family member with dyslexia? So I'm going to go ahead and put you into breakout rooms, and go ahead if you can introduce yourself and then discuss that.
And we'll give them probably, how much time, Mark? About 10 minutes, 8 minutes?
Let's go with 8 minutes.
Okay. Do you want me to create the breakout, or were you? I'm so sorry, Mark, if I was supposed to create the breakout.
Do you mind creating the breakouts?
So sorry, everyone. I will create the breakout rooms. I had to apologize. I had to apologize to room 8 because they only had 3 people in their room, but small but mighty.
Welcome back, everyone. And as you are coming back into the main room, thank you so much for engaging with your peers and talking about dyslexia and sharing your experiences. I jumped into a room and we had an interesting conversation about using Chat GPT to really help individuals with dyslexia, and would that be a great resource tool? And so it's great to hear these conversations. And would anyone like to come off mute and just share any highlights that they thought was that they would like the other members of this group would like to hear?
My group was interested to know if there was a percentage of students who are dyslexic and if that number is on the rise.
So that's a great question. And the reality is that the numbers, it depends, right? There's some estimates that will say, I've heard like 20% of the population might, because again, it's like a spectrum disorder. So if you have characteristics of dyslexia, but you don't necessarily qualify to be diagnosed with dyslexia and to that level where you need like special education services and supports, like it's really hard to gauge what that accurate number is going to look like, right? So if, and I've also heard that 20%, it might be a little bit on the high side as well. So that's why we look at like characteristics of dyslexia. And if they have characteristics of dyslexia, that's where you would start addressing the need. And we'll kind of talk about like the next steps. Mark, how did I do?
You did great.
Do you want to answer? So we're going to kind of segue that into the next step. So if you have a student that has characteristics of dyslexia, so we have that Nevada state law that we referred to earlier requires an early literacy screening assessment for students in K3 who meet the following criteria. Indicators of dyslexia are present and the student needs reading intervention. So we don't have like at the state level a list of like here are the screeners that you can use. That's really made at your local level. So like your school district might decide. Sometimes your school district will allow the school site, or a decision will be made at the charter organization. The law does say that the screener does have to have or screen for certain characteristics, including phonological awareness, sound symbol recognition, alphabet knowledge, decoding skills, rapid naming skills, and encoding skills. So whatever screener that you're going to use for these students, they should have those specific criteria that they're screening for. And then if you go to the next slide, we just want to be mindful about what screeners can and cannot do. So dyslexia screeners do not diagnose dyslexia. And then dyslexia screeners also do not replace other state assessments. So you can't use like the MAP assessment or a dyslexia, say like the CTOP2 in lieu of a MAP assessment. Dyslexia screeners do confirm indicators for dyslexia. So they'll confirm, without a shadow of doubt that they are there, they are present, and then provide specific areas for instruction and intervention. And I see someone mentioned too, like, could the percentage be off because of comorbidity for other disabilities like autism spectrum disorder? And yes, like you could potentially have dyslexia and have another disability in conjunction. Elizabeth, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. What's an example of a screener then?
So there are several. So like you could use like the CTOP2 could be a screener for dyslexia. I know that the MAP reading fluency under their umbrella does have a screener for dyslexia. So you would have to look, and there's several other screeners that you can use for dyslexia. So that would be something that you would want to have a conversation either with your school leadership, district leadership, to see what screeners do they have in place. For example, if you're using a CTOP2, there's a little bit of training that you probably will want to go through before administering that assessment. But really great question. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And then if we go to the next slide, so once you've screened a student and you've confirmed the indicators are there and really what the student needs instructionally. Oh, Mark, do you mind? Oh, there we go. We are going to then begin applying interventions, right? And we're going to provide it in a systematic and explicit way. So the most common feature of effective instruction and interventions for students either with characteristics of or a diagnosis of is the use of explicit and systematic phonics instruction. So explicit is direct, engaging, and unambiguous. So you want to be really clear in your instruction to the student. Then you also want to be systematic in your approach. And systematic means instruction refers to skills that are taught in a logical sequence and build upon each other. So whether you're using a program or whether you are just building the intervention, the teacher or the interventionist is building that program, that's what you want to really target and focus, is that explicit and systematic approach. And then if you go to the next slide, here are some other practices that can be really helpful when you're looking at the elementary level, so K5. So phoneme segmenting and blending are the most important skills for learning to read and spell words. So when you're talking about high yield strategies and practices, phoneme segmenting and blending really are going to be key. Phonemic awareness instruction is more effective when it's integrated with print. So think about L-Conan boxes, decodable texts, encoding skills as you're pairing it with those phonemic awareness activities. all students can benefit from explicit vocabulary instruction. So this is good not only for students with dyslexia, students with characteristics of dyslexia, but also your English language learners. Teach decoding of longer, more complex words in similar ways to how students learn to sound out shorter words. So you're going to want to teach students to identify syllables, affixes, roots. You're going to want to include morpheme instruction. And again, you don't necessarily need to wait until a student is in, say, 4th or 5th grade to begin teaching about syllables, affixes, and roots. I know like standards in 1st grade start with that syllabication. So you'll want to intervene early in that area.
Well, I'm going to be covering some 6th through grade 12 instructional practices. And so when we are looking at this grade band, we want to really teach students strategies for reading multisyllabic words by breaking them into smaller parts. And so when we think about that, those multisyllabic words can really be intimidating, but breaking them down into smaller parts make them more manageable. And this skill is really particularly crucial for dyslexic learners. And so the next strategy that I would like to talk about is really the syllable division, and thinking about how do we teach students to identify syllables with long words, show them that breaking words into syllables helps them read and pronounce more confidently. We can also look at teaching students to identify affixes and roots. And so these are really important components when we are thinking about working with individuals that are identified with dyslexia or show characteristics of dyslexia. And so that also includes morpheme instruction. These are the smallest units of meaning in language. Teaching these empowers our students to decode complex words and really grasp some of their meanings. And so the next strategy that I would like to talk about is instruction should really include vocabulary across content areas and relevant student background knowledge. And so what does that look like? So what that looks like is that contextual relevance. Explain that teaching vocabulary should really, it's going to connect their interests, experiences, and the subject that they're studying. That cross-curricular integration, demonstrate how vocabulary instruction can span multiple subjects. For example, teaching photosynthesis relates to both biology and environmental science. Also, student engagement is really important. Engage students by tapping into their prior knowledge. Encourage individuals that are identified with dyslexia to share what they already know about a word or a topic. Making learning, it's going to make them learning more meaningful. Many of our students have expertise and knowledge, and we really need to tap into that. The next one is real world application, and it's really emphasize the importance of teaching words that have practical real world application. And this will only enhance our students' communication skills. And so lastly, I want to talk about teach reading comprehension skills such as inference making and comprehension strategies such as main idea identification, text summarization, and text structure identification. And so again, what does that look like? Well, that looks like, again, inference making. Teach students how to make inferences by combining information from the text with their own knowledge. Encourage them to read between the lines. Give them strategies to try to infer implied details. Next is main idea identification. highlight the significance of identifying the main idea of a text. This skills really is taught at the elementary level, but this skill really helps students focus on that essential information and grasp that overall message from a text. And then lastly is text summarization. We as educators can also demonstrate the value of summarizing text. One person I just thought about this idea, you could utilize some of the AIs out there to help you summarize text, to help students chunk it down, encourage students to really condense key points into summaries. That way they can improve their retention and comprehension of information that's being presented. So all of this, incorporating all of these strategies into teaching can really greatly benefit students, especially those identified with dyslexia, by improving their reading and comprehension skills, expanding their vocabulary, and increasing their confidence in tackling complex texts. So overall, when we think about the big picture, the K through 12 instructional practices, students need that opportunity to read every day. Students with characteristics of dyslexia need more opportunities than their typical peers. They need those scaffolded supports that we just shared with you. And again, like I mentioned, the technology when it comes to assistive technology, when I was a special education resource teacher, assistive technology was very expensive. The software was very expensive. It had to be loaded onto an individual's device. It was licensed. It couldn't be shared. Today, with the advancements in technology, your iOS devices, your iPhones, your iPads, Apple is making huge gains and leaps and bounds when it comes to providing assistive technology tools for free to our students. And as you know now, we have cloud-based word processing applications such as Google Docs, Microsoft Office 365. All of those cloud-based applications are now becoming free, and they are incorporating many of these free assistive tools. Google Docs has many plugins that you can download for free that developers have created to support learners. So there's a lot of resources that have really popped up, and I would probably say within the last 4 years. And I only think that it will improve greatly over time to really support students identified with dyslexia.
We do have a hand raised. Christine, did you want to ask your question really quick?
Excuse me, not so much a question. I'm with the Assistive Technology Department for Clark County. And I was sharing in the breakout room that, long story short, if you go onto your Chromebook that's issued by CCSD, go into your app store, download, you would do a search for text help, and that's the read and write licenses. So it'll add a toolbar to your Chrome, and as long as you use your work email address, it's free for teachers. So CCSD, if the student has an IEP and there's an indication for the student that may be having difficulties with reading or writing, we'll provide those licenses for our students.
That's amazing. Thank you, Christine, for sharing. And, like Christine just shared, there's some really great tools out there that are for free. And as we have these huge advancements in technology, I think that this will only greatly improve for our students. And so we wanted to share some additional resources. The What Works Clearinghouse practice guides. The National Center on Intensive Intervention features explicit instruction when it comes to working with individuals identified with dyslexia. There is another website that I wanted to share with you. It's the National Center on Improving Literacy. They are a subsidy of the U.S. Department of Education. They are basically like think of it as a think tank that focuses on research when it comes to dyslexia. And they have staff that support states. They also support schools and districts with professional learning. There are free slide decks that you can download if you wanted to do your own PL with dyslexia, or if you wanted to learn more about dyslexia. There's some great tools and resources. Again, that's the National Center on Improving Literacy. And you can do a quick Google search and bookmark that. So.
Well, and I just wanted to add too, for that second resource, National Center on Intensive Intervention. So they do have a free training on explicit instruction that you can sign up. It's done asynchronously. It's free. So if you are interested in learning a little bit more about explicit instruction, or if you have new teachers or people that you feel like could benefit from learning a little bit more about what explicit instruction is, that might be a helpful tool or a resource for you to be able to share with whomever you work with.
So we would like to close out this afternoon with any questions or answers. We will drop the session survey into the chat. We know that you had many different choices when it came to selecting a session to attend this afternoon, and we greatly appreciate that you had selected spending the hour with Mandy and I. So we appreciate you, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference and the last session.
And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. If not, have a great rest of, there's one more session that will start in about 10 minutes.